Welcome to EnRich Relationships, a podcast designed to help leaders improve their personal and professional relationships from a father and son team.
We each bring executive corporate experience in both public and private companies, as well as personal experience as brothers, fathers, and sons. I'm Dax Rich.
And I'm Larry Rich, and together we discuss different leadership skills and concepts that will help you at work and at home. Having been a middle school and a high school and a community college teacher, there are classroom rules that apply not only in the class, but there's also the same type of rules that apply in leadership and in management in the job and also in families. The first one of these would be follow directions. We see that in every classroom that posts their classroom rules, that the first rule is to follow directions, but that applies perfectly also in work and in family. So in order to follow those directions, it's going to be important that we have those directions. And as leaders, we need to create those. If it's kind of our culture, it's our environment, but that there's certain directions that are a part of everything that we do. If it's a meeting, if it's a discussion, that we follow directions and that we're clear on what those directions are so that we can be successful.
I think one of the most jarring parts of starting my work experience way back when I first got my job at a corporation was seeing how different it was from school to the real world office. And that's not to say that there aren't similarities, because today we're talking about how they are quite similar, but many people took the approach that these were very, very different. And we just talked about that with follow directions. I've seen that quite a bit, where there's even coachings or trainings about how to get people to follow your directions. And it's just a surprise to me always, where that's something we learn in elementary school in the beginning years of our lives, is follow those directions from those who are teaching or leading the class. Same thing at work. Listen to your manager, follow those directions. But the fact that we have to teach that, or the fact that we need to reiterate those points, has always been surprising and a little jarring to me as well.
Many times, too, in our elementary years, the follow directions are simple things, like stay in your seat, don't walk around. I mean, they're very specific directions. But as we become adults and as we work in work environment, those directions usually become much more complex. And so in order to follow directions, sometimes we have to ask questions. There's nothing more annoying than being in a meeting and somebody asks a question that is obvious they didn't pay any attention, they're not following the directions, and they're just way out there. And so it's now on us that if we're going to follow the directions, we've got to be crystal clear on what those directions are. And so we've got to ask. We can't assume, well, he said this or she said this, so they must have meant this. If we're not sure, and it's not as black and white as, stay in your seat when I'm teaching, then we probably should ask the question, when you're teaching, do I need to stay in my seat? Not that it's going to be exactly that, but the directions have got to be crystal clear, or we're going to end up doing something that's going to be very embarrassing, awkward, or asking questions that people are going to probably roll their eyes or say, that was clear to me. I don't know why it wasn't clear to you.
Yeah. Well, and I know our next point we were talking about was raising your hand. I've been working remote for a while, and so raising your hand looks a little different. We have, in many cases, a digital or virtual hand that you raise. But even that small act of etiquette, whether in person, physically raising your hand, or virtually raising the virtual hand, there's a level of etiquette that comes with it, and it really helps the meeting to flow better, as well as it shows a sign of respect to the person speaking. We see quite often, especially in more heated debates, that people will just talk over each other and feel like they bring more to the table or have a more important thing to say. And you see that lack of respect. What that does is it really impacts the culture of the meeting, as well as the culture of the team, where people feel like they don't have that level of respect for one another. They feel like their ideas are more valuable or have more weight or merit than another person. And just by setting an expectation up front of, when we're in a meeting, we're going to raise our hands, creates that safer environment as well as a more inclusive environment.
I appreciate what you're saying, especially in the virtual environment. Many times it'll number the hands, and if somebody calls on you and you're hand number 3, saying, oh, you know what, there's a couple of people in front of me, why don't I let them go first? That respect of another person. If we're in person and together, it's so important to let people not only speak one at a time, but allow them to completely articulate their idea, because many, many times people will share an idea virtually or in person. And by the time they finished the idea, maybe I've raised my hand or I was going to say something, they said it. And if that's the case, to just say, they said eloquently what I was going to say and just let it move on. There's nothing worse in a meeting than when somebody says something and then somebody else reiterates the exact same point just because they raised their hand. Don't feel an obligation in a virtual meeting if you've raised your hand that you can't just put it down.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, and it doesn't say anything negative like it does to just reiterate the same exact point that was just made one or two hands previously.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool, perhaps, differences from work to the classroom is at work you also get that added opportunity to say, if you didn't have a chance to share your ideas, or we went around and heard from most people, but because of time we didn't get to finish everyone, send some ideas via email, or let's have a conversation in Slack or whatever tool you use. It's a very cool opportunity to, again, allow that respect while also following those classroom rules.
Good. Next one, it seems like in most classrooms, is be prepared. How important, both in our work environment and really in any meeting we're involved with, that when we're asked to do a presentation, that we show up with whatever it is, that we're prepared to present it, that we know our audience, so it's appropriate for the audience, that if there's things that we need to hand out, either if it's something in a virtual environment, that we can share the links, that we can share the document, whatever we need to do, but that we have that available, or the references so people can look up the information and find that on their own. Many times that can even be given out before the meeting so that people already have it and have had a chance to look at it. Just like an agenda, we want to make sure people have a chance to be familiar with what the topics are going to be and prepared to talk about them. Also important, if we're invited to a meeting, that we do look at the agenda so that we are prepared for the discussion. And obviously then that suggests that the agendas ought to go out probably at least 24 hours in advance, so there's time for everybody to do that. But the meeting will be much better, and folks, both the presenter and those being presented to, will be much better prepared if we're prepared in what we share, and give them a chance to be prepared also.
We also talked about doing your own work. It's easy or tempting to take credit for what other people do, especially in a group project, or copying someone's test or someone's homework assignment. And obviously we know why that's wrong. But at work, we see that happen quite a bit, where there's a large project and people will perhaps take a little more credit than is right, or exclude certain individuals, or maybe just completely copy something that was done before. And while it's always good to learn from others and to utilize different people, doing your own work is so important as well in preserving a culture where people feel like their voices are heard, but also in ensuring that people want to share their ideas and that people want to collaborate. If people know that their contributions or ideas are just going to be swallowed up, then they're not going to speak up. And I've unfortunately seen that happen, not so much with peers, but with leaders, where a leader will say, "Oh, I really like that idea," and then completely take it over and put their name on it and say, "Oh, you know what, this was my project. Yeah, the person was on my team, but I'm the one who's going to take the total credit for it." And it's like, you didn't do anything. You just put your name on it. And by doing that, it made the team, myself included, very unwilling to share our ideas, very unwilling to innovate and create new ideas. And in fact, if we were going to do that, we did it on our own, or we did it for other parts of the business, or we went completely around our boss. And right there, we see the danger in that, and that the team is not working cohesively. They're not sharing ideas, and ultimately, there's just no trust.
So basically, I'm going to summarize the 4 rules, because these are basically what you see posted on most classroom boards, but they're pretty much the same for work and all that other. And then we'll throw in a bonus one if that's all right. So follow directions. Second, raise your hand, or in other words, respect other people. The third thing, be prepared. And then the last one, be sure and do your own work. Now the bonus one, and this one we'll call procrastination hurts everyone. There's nothing worse than if you haven't had time, or as a manager, if I haven't had time to prepare for a meeting and to present and I'm on the agenda, than if I just wing it. And especially if it's something high level, if it's something that's not a big deal, but it's something we just need to get an update, it's better if I ask if folks have stuff to update, or just say, you know what, I need to ask if we table this item. I don't feel like I have the information at the level I want it to be. Can we just put this on the next agenda? Though it's kind of frustrating for some, if it's not something that has to be done, anytime we present something that we procrastinated, either intentionally or we just couldn't get to it for whatever reason, it really does hurt everyone, because usually it doesn't take long for the message to come out that you're not prepared on this, you don't have all your ducks lined up, and that really is discouraging. Plus, it sets a tone, if that's accepted or becomes the norm, that meetings aren't that big of a deal. If you don't have time, just, you can come to the table with whatever you've got. So procrastination never ever pays off in a work environment. Same in a relationship. If you're in a situation with your spouse or your kids, if you've promised to do something and it's like, well, I had this, and it's always excuses, procrastination always hurts relationships. Thank you for tuning into today's episode, and be sure to check out our other episodes where we explore additional ways to enrich your relationships at work and with your family.
Before you take off, we invite you to subscribe and share what you liked from this episode with friends, colleagues, and family. Take a moment and share feedback and suggestions with us directly at enrichrelationshipspodcast@gmail.com.
Lasting change comes from enriching your relationships both at work and at home.